The dust-laden wind stung Lena Oates's eyes as she watched the silhouettes of her traveling companions fade into the horizon, taking with them her horse, supplies, and any hope of survival. She had stopped for just 5 minutes to tighten her boot strap that had come loose, and now, in 1879, she stood alone on the harsh New Mexico trail with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small knife tucked in her boot. "No!" she screamed, her voice carried away by the merciless wind. "Come back!" But the party of miners she'd paid to escort her to Albuquerque had already disappeared, either not hearing her calls or more likely not caring about the woman they deemed too slow and troublesome for their journey. Lena slumped to the ground, her calico dress billowing around her. 22 years old, and she was going to die alone in the desert. She'd left everything behind in St. Louis, a suffocating existence as her aunt's unpaid servant for the promise of independence as a schoolteacher in New Mexico territory. Now, that dream seemed as distant as the stars above. The sun beat down relentlessly, and already her throat felt like sandpaper. Lena knew the basic rules of desert survival. She'd read about them in adventure books, but reading wasn't doing. Without water, she had perhaps 2 days before her body would succumb to the harsh elements. She pulled herself to her feet. "No sense dying sitting down," she muttered, forcing herself forward. The rolling landscape of scrub brush and scattered rock formations offered little comfort, but Lena had no choice but to follow the trail and pray she'd encounter anyone who might help. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and Lena's fair skin burned. Her lips cracked, and her steps became unsteady. Just as she was contemplating finding shade to rest in until evening, a sound caught her attention, the rhythmic clop of hooves against packed earth. She turned, squinting against the sunlight, and saw a lone rider approaching. His silhouette grew larger as he neared, a tall figure astride a chestnut horse, wide-brimmed hat shielding his face from the sun. "Help!" Lena croaked, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. She stumbled toward the trail, waving her arms frantically. "Please help!" The rider slowed, then halted his horse several yards away, studying her with caution, a wise precaution in these lawless territories where ambushes were common. After a moment, he dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Madam." His voice carried across the distance between them, deep and measured. "You all right?" As he approached, Lena could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His clothes were trail-worn but clean. A faded blue shirt, leather vest, and well-used chaps. A gun rested on his hip, but it was his expression, concerned yet wary, that caught her attention. "They left me," she said, her voice breaking. "The mining party I was traveling with. I fell behind and they just left." Her legs buckled then, the exhaustion and dehydration finally overcoming her determination. The man moved with surprising speed, catching her before she hit the ground. Up close, Lena could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind rather than age. "Easy now," he said, his arms steady around her. "When's the last time you had water?" "This morning," Lena admitted. "They took everything, my canteen, my provisions, even my horse." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "That's no way to treat anybody, let alone a lady." He guided her to a small outcropping of rocks that offered some shade. "Sit here. Name's Quinn Vance. Most folks call me Quinn." "Lena Oates," she replied, gratefully sinking onto the rock. "I'm supposed to be the new schoolteacher in Albuquerque." Quinn nodded, returning to his horse and retrieving a canteen. "Drink slow," he cautioned, handing it to her. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Lena's hands shook as she raised the canteen to her lips, the tepid water tasting sweeter than any wine. She forced herself to take small sips, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. "Thank you," she said when she'd drunk enough to ease the burning in her throat. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Quinn's expression darkened. "Nothing good." He glanced at the sun. "We've got about 4 hours of daylight left. Albuquerque's still 3 days' ride from here. There's a small settlement called Cimarron about a day's ride ahead. We can make it partway there before nightfall." Lena blinked, processing his words. "We? You don't think I'm leaving you out here, do you?" He raised an eyebrow. "I'm heading to Albuquerque myself. Was planning to stop in Cimarron anyway." "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition if we're going the same way." Quinn shrugged. "Besides, my ma would haunt me from the grave if I left a woman alone in the desert." A ghost of a smile touched Lena's lips. "What brings you to Albuquerque?" "Business," he said simply in a tone that discouraged further questions. "Can you ride?" "Yes, though it's been some time." Quinn nodded. "Good enough. We'll share my horse until we reach Cimarron. I can buy you a mount there." "I haven't any money," Lena admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Those men took everything except what I'm wearing and a small knife in my boot." Something like respect flashed in Quinn's eyes. Smart to keep a weapon hidden. He considered her for a moment. "Don't worry about the horse. We'll figure something out." He offered his hand, pulling her to her feet. Lena swayed slightly, and Quinn steadied her with a firm grip on her arm. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I won't forget this kindness." A faint smile touched his lips. "Let's get moving before you thank me too much. Trail's long and the company's rough." "I've had worse company," Lena replied, thinking of her aunt's endless criticism and the miners' crude jokes. Quinn helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. Lena tensed at the unfamiliar intimacy of a stranger's chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. "Relax," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "I don't bite." Despite her situation, Lena found herself smiling. "Good to know, Mr. Vance." "Quinn," he corrected. "Mr. Vance was my father, and we didn't get along." As the horse set off at a steady pace, Lena gradually allowed herself to relax against Quinn's solid presence. The rhythmic motion of the horse was soothing, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone in the vast wilderness eased some of her fear. They rode mostly in silence, Quinn occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber, he guided the horse toward a small arroyo where a few scraggly trees offered shelter. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced, dismounting and helping Lena down. Her legs felt wobbly after hours in the saddle, and Quinn kept a steadying hand on her arm until she found her balance. "It's not much, but it's defensible and there's a small spring nearby." "It looks perfect," Lena said honestly, relief flooding her at the sight of water. Quinn efficiently set up camp, unrolling his bedroll and gathering dry brush for a small fire. Lena tried to help, but her exhaustion was evident in her fumbling movements. "Rest," Quinn instructed, gesturing to a flat rock near where he was building the fire. "You've had a rough day." Too tired to argue, Lena sat, watching as Quinn moved around the camp with the confidence of a man accustomed to life on the trail. He retrieved a small pot and some provisions from his saddlebags, then disappeared toward the spring, returning minutes later with water. "It's not much," he said as he set the pot over the newly kindled fire, "but beans and jerky beat starving." "It sounds wonderful," Lena assured him, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "I haven't eaten since breakfast." As the beans simmered, Quinn sat across from her, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "So, schoolteacher, what brings you all the way from?" He paused, studying her. Back east somewhere, judging by your accent. St. Louis, Lena confirmed. And it's a long story. Quinn gestured to the darkening sky. Night's long, too. Lena found herself telling him about her parents' death from influenza when she was 16, her subsequent life with a stern aunt who saw her as little more than unpaid help, and the advertisement she'd answered seeking a teacher in New Mexico territory. "I've always wanted to teach," she explained, accepting the tin plate of beans Quinn handed her. And Albuquerque seemed far enough away to start fresh. "It's certainly that," Quinn agreed. "Town's growing fast since the railroad came through, but it's still rough around the edges." "What about you?" Lena asked, savoring the simple meal. "You mentioned business in Albuquerque." A shadow crossed Quinn's face. "I've got some unfinished matters to attend to." "I see," Lena said, though she didn't. Something in his tone warned against further questions. "Well, I'm grateful our paths crossed, whatever your reasons for traveling this way." Quinn's expression softened. "Eat up and get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow." After they finished eating, Quinn insisted Lena take his bedroll while he kept watch. "I'll wake you halfway through the night to switch," he promised. Lena meant to protest, but exhaustion overwhelmed her as soon as she lay down, the rough wool of the bedroll feeling like the finest featherbed to her weary body. She drifted off to the soft sounds of Quinn tending the fire, feeling safer than she had any right to in the middle of nowhere with a man she'd just met. She woke to gentle shaking, the night sky ablaze with stars unlike any she'd seen in St. Louis. Quinn's face was half-shadowed in the dying firelight. "Your turn to keep watch," he said quietly. "Just make sure the fire doesn't go out completely. Wake me if you hear or see anything unusual." Lena nodded, sitting up and wrapping his offered jacket around her shoulders against the desert's nighttime chill. Quinn stretched out on the hard ground nearby, his gun within easy reach, and within minutes his breathing had deepened in sleep. In the stillness of the night, Lena studied her unexpected savior. Asleep, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing a glimpse of the younger man beneath the weathered exterior. What had put that wariness in his eyes? What unfinished business drew him to Albuquerque? Despite her curiosity, Lena knew better than to pry. Out here, people had reasons for their silence. The night passed slowly, the fire crackling softly as Lena occasionally added small branches. Just before dawn, a coyote's howl pierced the darkness, causing her to start. Quinn was instantly awake, hand on his gun. "Just a coyote," he said after a moment, his voice rough with sleep. "Far off, too." Lena nodded, embarrassed by her jumpiness. "I'm not used to the sounds out here." "You will be," Quinn said simply, rising to stir the fire back to life. "Desert has its own language. You learn to listen." They breakfasted on hardtack and jerky, washed down with strong coffee that Quinn brewed in a small pot. As they ate, he outlined their journey. "We'll reach Miller's Creek by midday if we push hard," he explained, tracing a route in the dirt with a stick. "Can refill water there. Then it's another 6 hours to Cimarron if the weather holds." "And if it doesn't?" Lena asked, eyeing the cloudless dawn sky. "Then we find shelter and wait it out." Quinn's matter-of-fact tone was reassuring. Desert storms come up fast and mean. No sense fighting them. As they packed up camp, Lena insisted on helping despite Quinn's protests. "I may be a school teacher, Mr. Vance, but I'm not helpless," she said firmly, rolling up the bedding. A hint of amusement touched Quinn's eyes. "Never said you were, Miss Oates." They mounted up as the first rays of sunlight painted the desert in shades of pink and gold. Again, Lena found herself cradled between Quinn's arms as he controlled the reins, but this time the proximity felt less awkward. There was something comforting about the solid strength of him at her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The morning passed in companionable silence, broken only by Quinn's occasional comments about the landscape or brief stories about places he'd been. Lena listened, fascinated by his knowledge of the territory and the quiet confidence with which he navigated it. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly. Lena's throat was parched despite careful sips from Quinn's canteen. Just as she was beginning to wonder if they'd missed Miller's Creek, Quinn pointed to a line of greener vegetation in the distance. "Water," he said. "And shade if we're lucky." The small creek was hardly more than a trickle between rocks, but to Lena it looked like paradise. Quinn helped her dismount, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "Rest," he instructed, leading his horse to drink. "We'll stay until the worst of the heat passes." Lena sank gratefully onto a shaded rock, removing her boots to dip her swollen feet in the cool water. The relief was immediate and blissful. She closed her eyes, savoring the moment of comfort. When she opened them, she found Quinn watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. He quickly looked away, busying himself with refilling the canteens. "How did you learn so much about surviving out here?" Lena asked, genuinely curious. Quinn was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Necessity. Came west when I was 17, had to learn fast or die. That's young to be on your own." "Not so uncommon," he replied with a shrug. "War left a lot of boys without much choice." Lena studied him, trying to imagine the 17-year-old boy beneath the hardened exterior of the man. "The Civil War. You'd have been very young." "Young enough to remember, old enough to lose everything," Quinn said, a finality in his tone that discouraged further questions. He handed her a piece of jerky and a handful of dried fruit. "Eat. We've still got a long ride ahead." They rested for an hour, the midday sun turning the world into a shimmering haze of heat. When Quinn finally announced it was time to move on, Lena felt refreshed enough to face the journey ahead. The afternoon stretched endlessly, the landscape unchanging except for the gradual appearance of more vegetation as they followed the invisible water sources beneath the ground. Lena found herself dozing against Quinn's chest, lulled by the horse's steady gait and the warmth of the sun. She woke with a start when Quinn tensed behind her. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Riders," he said quietly, nodding toward a dust cloud in the distance. "Could be nothing, could be trouble." His hand moved to rest on his gun as the riders drew closer, 3 men on dusty horses, their faces obscured by bandanas against the blowing sand. "Stay calm," Quinn murmured. "Let me do the talking." The men approached cautiously, spreading out in a way that made Lena's heart race. Their eyes moved from Quinn to her and back again, calculating. "Afternoon," the lead rider called, his voice rough. "Long way from anywhere, ain't you?" "Heading to Cimarron," Quinn replied evenly. "Just passing through." The man's eyes narrowed. "Pretty companion you got there, she your wife?" Lena felt Quinn's arm tighten almost imperceptibly around her waist. "She is," he lied smoothly. "Newlywed." The rider smirked, clearly skeptical. "Congratulations." He exchanged glances with his companions. "Road's dangerous for a couple traveling alone. Lot of desperate men about." "We'll manage," Quinn said, his tone polite but firm. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of wind and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Lena held her breath, aware that the wrong word or movement could spark violence. Finally, the leader nodded. "Well then. Good day to you both." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Madam." The men rode past, and Lena didn't release her breath until they were well beyond earshot. "Were they?" she began. "Outlaws, probably," Quinn confirmed. "But they weren't looking for a fight with an armed man in broad daylight." They're headed away from Cimarron, which is good for us." Lena nodded, still shaken. "Thank you for saying I was your wife." "Seemed the safest play," Quinn said matter-of-factly. "Married women are sometimes, though not always, left alone." They rode on, but the encounter had cast a shadow over the journey. Quinn was more vigilant now, his body tense against hers, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. When they finally spotted the distant buildings of Cimarron as the sun began to set, Lena could feel his relief mirroring her own. Cimarron was little more than a cluster of buildings serving the surrounding ranches and travelers passing through a saloon, general store, small hotel, and livery stable. Dogs barked as they rode down the dusty main street, and curious faces peered from windows and doorways. Quinn guided the horse to the small hotel, dismounting before helping Lena down. Her legs nearly buckled after so many hours in the saddle, and Quinn steadied her with a firm hand. "Wait here," he instructed, tying his horse to the hitching post. "I'll see about rooms." Lena nodded, too exhausted to argue. She watched as Quinn entered the hotel, his tall frame ducking slightly under the doorway. While she waited, she tried to brush the worst of the dust from her dress, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. Quinn emerged minutes later, his expression grim. "One room left," he said. "I'll take the floor." Before Lena could protest, a voice called out from across the street. "Quinn Vance." "That you?" Quinn turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun before relaxing. A broad smile, the first genuine smile Lena had seen from him, spread across his face. "Daniel Cooper," he said as a short, barrel-chested man with a magnificent mustache approached. "Didn't expect to find you in this backwater." The men clasped forearms in greeting, the gesture speaking of long acquaintance. "Running the livery now," Daniel explained, gesturing to the stable down the street. "Settled down with a local widow." His gaze shifted curiously to Lena. "Miss Lena Oates," Quinn introduced her. "Found her abandoned on the trail by some mining party. She's the new school teacher for Albuquerque." Daniel's expression darkened. "Abandoned? That's plain wicked." He tipped his hat to Lena. "Madam, pleased to meet you despite the circumstances." "Likewise, Mr. Cooper," Lena replied, warming to the man's genuine concern. "Danny," Quinn said, lowering his voice, "hotel's only got one room. You know anywhere else?" Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "Matter of fact, we've got a spare room at our place." "Mary'd be pleased to have a lady visitor." He turned to Lena. "My wife gets tired of just my company sometimes. You'd be doing her a favor." Relief washed over Lena. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Daniel interrupted. "Mary'll have my hide if I don't bring you home. She's been complaining about having no one civilized to talk to for months." Quinn looked skeptical. "You sure Mary won't mind?" "Mind?" Daniel laughed. "She'll be setting out her best china before we walk through the door." He winked at Lena. "Warning though, she'll talk your ear off." Lena smiled, the first genuine smile since her ordeal began. "That sounds wonderful, actually." The Cooper home was a modest but well-kept house at the edge of town. Mary Cooper, a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes, welcomed Lena as if she were a long-lost relative, immediately ushering her inside for a hot bath and clean clothes. "You poor dear," Mary clucked, helping Lena out of her dust-covered dress. "Abandoned on the trail. Some men have no Christian decency at all." As Lena sank into the steaming bathwater, the first proper bath she'd had in weeks of travel, she felt tears of relief and gratitude spring to her eyes. Mary pretended not to notice, busying herself with laying out a simple but clean dress for Lena to wear. "It's not fancy," Mary apologized, "but it should fit well enough until we can wash your things." "It's perfect," Lena assured her, overwhelmed by the woman's kindness. After her bath, dressed in Mary's borrowed clothes. Lena found Quinn and Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, deep in conversation that halted abruptly when she entered. Quinn's eyes widened slightly at her transformed appearance, hair clean and loosely braided, face free of dust, wearing a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "Miss Oates," he said, standing. "You look recovered." Mary snorted. "That's a man's way of saying you look pretty, dear." She bustled around the kitchen, placing a hearty stew on the table. "Now eat, all of you. Nothing solves problems like a full stomach." Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, with Daniel sharing local news and Mary asking Lena about her teaching experience. Quinn was quieter, but Lena noticed how he relaxed in the Coopers' company, occasionally contributing a dry comment that made the others laugh. As the meal wound down, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So, Quinn, Mary and I've been wondering what brings you through these parts. Last we heard, you were ranging up Montana way." A shadow crossed Quinn's face. "I've got business in Albuquerque." Daniel and Mary exchanged glances. "What kind of business?" Mary asked carefully. Quinn's jaw tightened. "The personal kind." An awkward silence fell, broken when Mary stood to clear the plates. "Lena, dear, would you help me with these dishes? The men can move their mysterious conversations to the porch where they belong." Once the men were outside, Mary turned to Lena. "How much has Quinn told you about himself?" "Almost nothing," Lena admitted, drying a plate Mary handed her. "We've only known each other since yesterday." Mary nodded, unsurprised. "Quinn's a good man, one of the best Daniel and I have known." "But he carries shadows." She hesitated. "It's not my story to tell, but be careful with him. He's had more than his share of grief." Lena thought of Quinn's guarded expressions, the tension that never fully left his shoulders. "I don't think he's interested in sharing his burdens with a schoolteacher he just met." Mary's eyes were knowing. "I wouldn't be so sure about that, dear. I saw how he looked at you." Before Lena could ask what she meant, the men returned and the moment for confidences passed. That night, in the Coopers' small but comfortable guest room, Lena lay awake, Mary's words echoing in her mind. What shadows did Quinn Vance carry? And why did she, a practical woman focused on building a new life, care so much about the mysteries behind a stranger's eyes? Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon. Lena, dressed in her own clothes, now washed and pressed thanks to Mary's diligence, and joined the others for breakfast. Quinn was already at the table, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt that Daniel had lent him. "Good morning," he greeted her, standing as she entered. "Sleep well, better than I have in weeks," Lena admitted with a smile. "The Coopers' hospitality is remarkable." Mary waved away the compliment. "Nonsense. It's just decent Christian behavior." Over breakfast, they discussed the journey ahead. "It's still a 2-day ride to Albuquerque," Quinn explained. "We should reach Bernalillo by nightfall if we make good time, then Albuquerque the following day." "About that," Daniel interjected, "I've been thinking. Miss Oates needs her own mount." Quinn nodded. "I was planning to purchase one before we leave." Daniel shook his head. "No need. I've got a mare, gentle but strong, good for a lady rider. Consider her a gift." When Quinn began to protest, Daniel held up his hand. "Not from me, from the town council. We've been meaning to establish better relations with Albuquerque. Consider it a goodwill gesture to their new schoolteacher." Lena was overwhelmed. "Mr. Cooper, that's far too generous." "Danny's right," Mary insisted. "Besides, that mare needs a good home. Previous owner passed last winter, and she's been eating her head off in our stable ever since." After breakfast, they walked to the livery where Daniel introduced Lena to a pretty sorrel mare with a white star on her forehead. "Her name's Penny," he said, as the horse gently nuzzled Lena's palm. "Gentle as they come, but she's got stamina." While Daniel helped Lena get acquainted with her new mount, Quinn secured supplies for the journey ahead: food, water, and an extra blanket for Lena. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. The Coopers saw them off with packed lunches and warm embraces. "You come back and visit," Mary instructed Lena. "Both of you." As they rode out of Cimarron, Lena on her new mare and Quinn on his gelding, a sense of optimism filled her for the first time since her abandonment. The journey ahead still held challenges, but she was no longer alone and helpless. "The Coopers are wonderful people," she commented as they settled into a steady pace. Quinn nodded. "The best. Known Daniel since the war. He saved my life at Vicksburg." It was the most personal information he'd volunteered, and Lena sensed an opening. "You were in the war together. Different units," Quinn replied. "But we ended up in the same field hospital. Danny was better off than me, helped keep the gangrene from taking my leg." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Lena could imagine the horror behind his words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The war took so much from so many." Quinn was silent for a long moment. "It did." Then, seemingly eager to change the subject, "How's Penny treating you?" "She's perfect," Lena said, patting the mare's neck. "I can't believe their generosity." "The Coopers have always been that way," Quinn said. "Even when they had nothing themselves." They rode steadily through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they moved south. Scrubby juniper and pinyon pines dotted the terrain, and distant mountains shimmered in the heat haze. Quinn pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife, teaching Lena to read the desert in ways her books never had. By midday, they stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a trickling stream. As they watered the horses and ate the lunch Mary had packed, a comfortable quiet settled between them. "Tell me about the school in Albuquerque," Quinn said suddenly. "What do you know about it?" Lena brightened at the question. "It's relatively new, built 3 years ago when the town started growing after the railroad came. There are about 30 children of various ages." She smiled. "The board wrote that they're particularly in need of someone who can teach proper English and arithmetic, as most of the children speak Spanish at home." "Do you speak Spanish?" Quinn asked. Lena's smile faltered. "Not yet. I've been studying from a book during my journey, but—" She sighed. "I'm worried that will be a disadvantage." "You'll learn," Quinn assured her. "Children are good teachers." "What about you?" Lena asked. "Do you speak Spanish?" Quinn nodded. "Enough to get by. Worked on a few ranches owned by Mexican families over the years." "Perhaps you could teach me some phrases," Lena suggested. "Just enough to get started." Something like pleasure crossed Quinn's face. "I could do that." As they continued their journey, Quinn began pointing out objects and naming them in Spanish: arbol for tree, cielo for sky, caballo for horse. Lena repeated each word carefully, her quick mind absorbing the new language. The afternoon passed pleasantly, the language lessons helping to distract from the heat and physical discomfort of long hours in the saddle. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Lena had learned dozens of words and several basic phrases. "You're a fast learner," Quinn remarked. "Those kids in Albuquerque are lucky." Lena flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "Thank you. I've always loved learning new things." As dusk approached, Quinn led them toward a small mesa where a natural overhang provided shelter. "We'll camp here tonight," he decided. "Good view of the surroundings, natural windbreak, and defensible." They made camp efficiently, Quinn starting a small fire while Lena cared for the horses. The easy division of labor felt natural, as if they'd traveled together for years rather than days. Over a simple dinner of beans and biscuits from their supplies, Quinn continued Lena's Spanish lessons, teaching her phrases she might use in a classroom. His patience and encouragement revealed a gentler side to him that she found increasingly attractive. As night fell, bringing with it the desert's deep chill. They sat close to the fire, wrapped in their blankets. The stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, a vast canopy of light against the velvet darkness. "It's beautiful," Lena murmured, gazing upward. "I've never seen so many stars." Quinn followed her gaze. "That's one thing about the west sky goes on forever. Do you ever get used to it?" she asked. "No," Quinn admitted. "Some nights it still stops me in my tracks." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a coyote. In that moment, Lena felt a connection to this man that transcended their brief acquaintance, a sense of shared wonder at the world's beauty despite its hardships. "Quinn," she ventured after a while, "may I ask you something personal?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "What's really taking you to Albuquerque?" Lena asked gently. "You don't have to tell me, but—" Quinn stared into the fire for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "My brother's killer is there." Lena's breath caught. "Your brother, younger brother, James." Quinn's face hardened. "Shot in the back 5 years ago by a man named Edward Collins, over a card game." His hands clenched. "Collins fled before the law could catch him. I've been tracking him ever since. Got word last month he's dealing cards at a saloon in Albuquerque." "And you're going there too?" "What?" Lena asked, though she feared she knew the answer. Quinn's eyes met hers, cold and determined. "To make sure justice is done." "By killing him." The words escaped before Lena could stop them. "By bringing him to the law," Quinn corrected. "If he comes peacefully." "And if he doesn't?" Quinn didn't answer, but he didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Lena struggled to reconcile this revelation with the man who had saved her life, who patiently taught her Spanish, who treated her with unfailing respect. "Violence doesn't bring peace," she said softly. "It only brings more pain." "Easy words from someone who's never lost family to violence," Quinn replied, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard it. Lena flinched. "You're right. I haven't experienced what you have." She hesitated. "But I've seen what vengeance does to people. My father was a judge in St. Louis. The families who couldn't let go of their hatred, it consumed them, even when they got what they thought was justice." Quinn was silent for a long moment. "What would you have me do? Forget my brother?" "Let his killer go free?" "No," Lena said. "But there's a difference between justice and vengeance. One heals, the other destroys." She reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "And I think you know that, or you would have said outright you planned to kill him." Quinn looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp hers. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through Lena that had nothing to do with the fire. "I don't know if I can walk away if I see him," he admitted, vulnerability showing through his hard exterior for the first time. "James was just a kid, 20 years old, never hurt anyone." "What was he like?" Lena asked gently. A sad smile touched Quinn's lips. "Sunshine in human form, always laughing, always seeing the good in people." He shook his head. "Should have protected him better." "You can't blame yourself for another man's actions," Lena said. "Can I?" Quinn's voice was raw. "I'm the one who taught him to play cards. I'm the one who should have been there that night." Lena squeezed his hand. "And Collins is the one who pulled the trigger. That choice was his alone." Quinn didn't respond, but he didn't pull his hand away either. They sat in silence, hands joined, as the fire burned low and the night deepened around them. When they finally prepared for sleep, Quinn insisted again that Lena take the bedroll while he kept first watch. This time, she didn't argue, recognizing his need for solitude after their conversation. As she drifted toward sleep, Lena found herself praying not just for their safe journey, but for Quinn to find peace beyond revenge. The thought of him risking his life in a gunfight troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Morning brought a subtle shift in their relationship. Something had changed in the night, a trust established, a connection deepened. As they prepared for the day's journey, their movements around the camp were synchronized, anticipating each other's needs without words. The day's ride was long but uneventful. They passed occasional homesteads and small settlements, signs of civilization growing more frequent as they neared Bernalillo. Quinn continued Lena's Spanish lessons, seeming grateful for the distraction from his darker thoughts. By late afternoon, the town of Bernalillo came into view, larger than Cimarron, with several streets of adobe buildings and a small church whose bell tower rose above the surrounding structures. Unlike Cimarron's frontier rawness, Bernalillo showed the influence of its Spanish and Mexican heritage in its architecture and layout. They secured rooms at the town's modest hotel, separate accommodations this time, a propriety that suddenly seemed like an unwelcome barrier to Lena. After settling the horses at the livery, Quinn suggested dinner at the hotel's small restaurant. The simple meal of enchiladas and beans was a welcome change from trail food, and Lena savored each bite. Across the table, Quinn seemed preoccupied, his thoughts clearly turning toward tomorrow's arrival in Albuquerque. "What will you do," he asked suddenly, "when you reach Albuquerque? After you start teaching, I mean." The question surprised Lena. "I haven't thought much beyond establishing my classroom," she admitted. "Find somewhere permanent to live, I suppose. The school board mentioned a room above the general store as temporary lodging." Quinn frowned. "Alone? That's not proper." Lena raised an eyebrow. "I'm a grown woman, Quinn. Spinster schoolteachers living alone is perfectly acceptable, even in the East." "This isn't the East," Quinn pointed out. "Towns out here have different standards. People talk." "Let them talk," Lena said with a shrug, though his concern touched her. "I've come too far to worry about gossip." Quinn studied her with newfound respect. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Oates." "I've had to be," she replied simply. After dinner, they walked through the town in the cool evening air. Bernalillo was preparing for some sort of festival, with paper lanterns being strung between buildings and makeshift stalls being erected in the small plaza. "Feast of San Lorenzo," Quinn explained when Lena asked. "Patron saint of the town. Celebrations tomorrow night." "We'll miss it," Lena said, a touch of regret in her voice. The colorful preparations looked festive and joyful. Quinn hesitated. "We could stay," he suggested. "One more day wouldn't make much difference." Lena looked at him in surprise. "But your business in Albuquerque?" "It's waited 5 years," Quinn said. "One more day won't change anything." What remained unspoken hung between them, that perhaps he wasn't as eager to face his brother's killer as he'd once been. "I'd like that," Lena said softly. "If you're sure." Quinn nodded, his decision made. "I'll let the livery know in the morning." They walked back to the hotel in companionable silence, the unspoken growing between them awareness that their journey was coming to an end, that tomorrow night might be their last together before the realities of Albuquerque separated them. At Lena's door they paused. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "For everything." Quinn's gaze softened. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Lena disagreed. "They wouldn't have. Those miners didn't." Something shifted in Quinn's expression, a vulnerability, a yearning. For a breathless moment, Lena thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both gallant and restrained. "Good night, Lena," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Good night, Quinn," she replied, her hand tingling where his lips had brushed it. Inside her room, Lena stood at the window, watching as Quinn crossed the street toward the saloon. Despite his tormented past and uncertain intentions, she was falling in love with him, his quiet strength, his hidden gentleness, the way he treated her as an equal rather than a burden. But tomorrow night, They would reach Albuquerque, and Quinn would face his brother's killer. What would happen then? Would he find the peace he sought, or would vengeance claim him too? And where would that leave her, the schoolteacher who had unwittingly given her heart to a man on a mission of justice or revenge? Morning brought clear skies and the bustle of festival preparations. After breakfast, Quinn and Lena explored the town, watching as vendors set up stalls and musicians tuned instruments in the plaza. The atmosphere was one of joyful anticipation, and Lena found herself caught up in the excitement. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted as they watched children practicing traditional dances in the plaza. St. Louis had celebrations, of course, but nothing so alive, Quinn suggested, watching her face light up as musicians began playing. "Exactly," Lena agreed. "Everything here feels more immediate somehow." As the day progressed, the festival came to life around them. Food vendors offered tamales, fresh tortillas, and sweet bizcochitos. Musicians played lively tunes on guitars and violins, and dancers in colorful skirts whirled in the plaza. Quinn translated conversations and explained traditions, his knowledge revealing years spent among Mexican communities. In the late afternoon, a procession formed to carry a statue of San Lorenzo from the church through the town. Quinn and Lena watched from the edge of the plaza, the solemnity of the religious observance a stark contrast to the festivities that would follow. "It's beautiful," Lena murmured, moved by the devotion on the participants' faces. Quinn nodded. "Faith matters out here. When you're at the mercy of the land, you need something to hold on to." "Do you have faith?" Lena asked, curious about this aspect of him she hadn't glimpsed before. Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Had it once, lost it after the war, after James." He glanced at her. "You?" "I believe," Lena said simply. "Not always in the way my aunt's preacher thought I should, but I believe in something greater than ourselves." As evening fell, the celebration truly began. Lanterns illuminated the plaza, casting a warm glow over the festivities. A band played dance music, and couples of all ages took to the makeshift dance floor in the center of the square. Quinn bought Lena a glass of sweet wine and led her to a bench where they could watch the dancing. The music, the wine, and Quinn's presence beside her created a sense of enchantment that made Lena's heart feel lighter than it had in years. "Dance with me?" Quinn asked suddenly, setting aside his own untouched glass. Lena looked at him in surprise. "You dance?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Poorly, but I know the steps to this one." He led her to the edge of the dancing area, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her other hand in his. The contact sent a shiver through Lena despite the warm evening. "Just follow my lead," Quinn murmured, guiding her into the simple steps of the dance. What Quinn lacked in grace, he made up for in confidence. Lena found herself relaxing into his arms, following his movements as if they'd danced together 100 times before. The music, the swirling couples around them, the stars emerging in the twilight sky above it all combined to create a perfect moment that Lena knew she would remember forever. As the dance ended, Quinn didn't immediately release her. Their eyes met, and in his gaze Lena saw the same longing she felt, a desire for this night, this feeling to continue beyond the boundaries of the festival and their journey. "Quinn," she began, not sure what she wanted to say but knowing she needed to say something. Before she could continue, a commotion near the edge of the plaza drew their attention. A group of men had entered the square, dusty from travel and loud with drink. At their center was a tall, sandy-haired man with a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Quinn went rigid beside her, his hand tightening painfully around hers. "What is it?" Lena asked, alarmed by his sudden tension. "Collins," he said, his voice barely audible. "Edward Collins." Lena's heart dropped. "Here, are you certain?" "I'd know that face anywhere," Quinn confirmed, his expression hardening into the cold mask she hadn't seen since their first meeting. "I've seen it in my nightmares for 5 years." She followed his gaze to the newcomer, trying to reconcile the laughing man accepting a drink from a festival vendor with the cold-blooded killer of Quinn's story. Collins looked ordinary handsome in a rough way, but nothing in his appearance suggested a man capable of murder. "Quinn," Lena said urgently, gripping his arm, "please don't do anything rash. Not here, not with all these people." For a terrible moment she thought he wouldn't listen. His body was coiled with tension, his hand hovering near his gun. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Not here," he agreed, his voice tight, "but I can't let him walk away again." "We should tell the sheriff," Lena suggested. "If there are warrants for his arrest, there are," Quinn confirmed. "In Wyoming territory, not here. And frontier justice doesn't always work the way it should." He was already moving toward the edge of the plaza, drawing Lena with him. "I need to follow him, see where he's staying." "I'm coming with you," Lena insisted, refusing to release his arm. Quinn looked like he wanted to argue but seemed to recognize the determination in her eyes. "Stay behind me. If anything happens, you run. Promise me." Lena nodded, though she had no intention of abandoning him. They followed Collins and his companions at a distance as they moved from the festival toward the saloon. The men were clearly celebrating something, buying rounds for strangers and laughing boisterously. "They've just come from a cattle sale," Quinn deduced, observing their behavior. Flush with money and looking to spend it, they watched as the group disappeared into the saloon. Quinn led Lena to a bench across the street where they could observe the entrance without being obvious. "What now?" Lena asked. "We wait," Quinn replied grimly. "Sooner or later he'll leave, when he does." "When he does, we alert the authorities," Lena said firmly. "Quinn, please." "This doesn't have to end in violence." Quinn's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what he took from me." "I understand that killing him won't bring your brother back," Lena countered. "And it will destroy the man I've come to." She stopped abruptly, the word love hovering unspoken between them. Quinn's eyes softened slightly. "The man you've come to what?" Lena took a deep breath. "Care for," she said, not quite brave enough to speak her heart fully. "These past days I've seen the kind of man you are, Quinn. A good man. A man who saves strangers and shares everything he has. Don't throw that away for vengeance." Before Quinn could respond, the saloon doors burst open and Collins emerged alone, swaying slightly from drink but heading purposefully down the street. "He's going back to his lodgings," Quinn said, rising. "This is my chance." "Our chance," Lena corrected, standing beside him. "I'm coming with you." Quinn looked like he wanted to protest, but time was of the essence. Together, they followed Collins through the darkening streets, away from the festival's noise and light. He led them to a small boarding house on the edge of town, entering without looking back. "Wait here," Quinn instructed, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I mean it, Lena." This time she nodded, recognizing that her presence inside could put them both in danger. "Be careful, please." Quinn hesitated, then did something that took her breath away. He leaned down and kissed her, briefly but with unmistakable feeling. "For luck," he murmured, then turned and entered the boarding house. Lena's heart pounded as she waited in the shadows, straining to hear any sound from within. Minutes stretched like hours, her imagination conjuring terrible scenarios: gunshots, violence, Quinn lying dead at the hands of his brother's killer. Just as she was about to disregard his instructions and go inside, the door opened. Quinn emerged, his expression unreadable, pushing a disheveled Collins in front of him. The man's hands were bound behind his back. "Quinn!" Lena stepped forward, relief washing over her. "We're taking him to the sheriff," Quinn said, his voice strained but controlled. "He's confessed to killing James." Collins looked sullen but resigned. "Didn't know he had a brother who'd hunt me halfway across the country," he muttered. "It was a fair game. Your brother accused me of cheating." "So you shot him in the back." Quinn's voice was dangerously quiet. Collins had the grace to look ashamed. "I was drunk, angry, not saying it was right, but it wasn't planned neither." "Save it for the judge," Quinn said, pushing him forward. They walked through the quiet streets to the sheriff's office, where a sleepy deputy was startled into alertness by their arrival. When Quinn explained the situation and showed the wanted poster he carried, the deputy locked Collins in a cell and promised the sheriff would deal with him in the morning. As they left the jailhouse, Lena felt the tension gradually leaving Quinn's body. They walked in silence back toward the hotel, the sounds of the festival a distant backdrop. "You didn't kill him," Lena said finally. Quinn stopped walking, looking up at the star-filled sky. "I wanted to," he admitted. "Had my gun on him, finger on the trigger." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the distant lamplight. "But I heard your voice in my head, about justice versus vengeance." A pained smile crossed his face. "And I realized James wouldn't have wanted his memory to turn me into a killer." Lena reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "What will happen to him now? Sheriff will contact Wyoming territory. He'll stand trial there." Quinn squeezed her hand. "It's enough. Has to be." They continued walking, neither in a hurry to end this moment of peace after so much tension. The festival was winding down, just a few couples still dancing in the plaza as they passed. "What will you do now?" Lena asked. "After we reach Albuquerque tomorrow," Quinn considered the question. "I haven't thought beyond finding Collins," he admitted. "Been chasing him so long I never planned for after." "You could stay," Lena suggested, her heart pounding at her own boldness. "Albuquerque's growing. A man with your skills could find work." "My skills?" Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Not much call for manhunters in settled towns. You know horses, you speak Spanish, you've survived out here for years," Lena pointed out. "Those are valuable skills." She hesitated. "And there might be other reasons to stay." Quinn stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "What reasons might those be, Miss Oates?" Lena gathered her courage. "Perhaps a school teacher who's grown rather fond of you, who thinks there might be something worth exploring between us." The vulnerability in Quinn's eyes took her breath away. "Lena," he said softly, "you deserve better than a man like me." "I disagree," she replied firmly. "I deserve a man who would save a stranger without hesitation, who would share everything he has, who would teach me Spanish and dance with me under the stars." She stepped closer. "I deserve you, Quinn Vance. If you'll have me." For a moment he looked stunned by her declaration. Then slowly a genuine smile spread across his face, the most open, unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "I don't have much to offer," he warned. "No home, not much money." "I don't need much," Lena assured him. "Just you." Quinn's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "You should know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I've been falling in love with you since I found you on that trail." Lena's heart soared. "That's convenient," she replied, smiling through sudden tears, "because I've been falling in love with you too." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't brief or tentative. It was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of everything words couldn't fully express. Lena melted into him, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They reached Albuquerque the following afternoon, riding side by side into the bustling town that would become their home. The school board welcomed Lena warmly, impressed by her credentials and enthusiasm. When she introduced Quinn as her fiancé, the surprise was evident, but no one questioned their story. Quinn found work at a local livery within days, his knowledge of horses an easy way with both English and Spanish-speaking customers, making him a valuable employee. The owner, an aging man named Hargrove, hinted that he was looking for someone to take over the business eventually. Within a month, they were married in Albuquerque's small church, with Lena's students throwing flower petals and Quinn wearing a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. The Coopers traveled from Cimarron for the ceremony, Mary weeping happy tears and Daniel slapping Quinn on the back with obvious approval. They built a life together in Albuquerque, a small house on the edge of town, eventually filled with the laughter of their children. Quinn never fully forgot his brother, but the sharp pain of loss gradually softened into bittersweet memory. When their first son was born, they named him James, honoring the uncle he would never meet but whose story he would know. Lena flourished as a teacher, eventually opening her own school as Albuquerque grew with the railroad's expansion. Quinn purchased the livery when old Hargrove retired, building it into a successful business that served the town's growing population. Sometimes, when the desert wind blew a certain way, Lena would remember those desperate hours alone on the trail, abandoned and afraid. Those memories no longer brought fear, only gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought Quinn into her life, the cowboy who had shared everything he had, and in doing so, found everything he needed. Years later, when their hair had grayed and their children had children of their own, Quinn and Lena would still sit on their porch in the cool desert evenings, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge in that endless western sky. In those quiet moments, they remembered their journey, not just the physical passage through the desert, but the path that had led them from strangers to lovers to partners in all things. "You ever regret it?" Lena asked one such evening. "Staying here with me instead of continuing to wander?" Quinn's weathered face softened as he looked at her, the love in his eyes undimmed by the passage of time. "Never," he said simply. "Best decision I ever made was sharing my canteen with a stubborn schoolteacher on the trail to Albuquerque." Lena smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And the best decision I ever made was trusting a mysterious cowboy with a good heart." Together they watched the sun set over the land that had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately given them the greatest gift of all, each other.